Welcome to the NBA Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Brent Hyden. Taking a look at tonight's eight-game slate on FanDuel and DraftKings. Should be a relatively high-scoring slate. We got crazy amount of games that are over 220 to talk about. We get a OKC going to play it.
Yeah, you lagged a little bit there. I think you mentioned the OKC game, but I can't believe you completely just glossed over the huge trade we had yesterday. Like, how are you just not going to talk about the Tyler Zeller trade?
I don't know. For a Boston fan, there was some bad blood there, and I think I just wanted to gloss over for the 14 minutes that he'd put on the court.
Well, he is expected to suit up tonight, so he's going to probably just completely ruin all of our plans.
As always, because coming off last night, I think we're going to get some rollover here. And Rolo is very close to Rolo and rollover, and I just want to say, Robin Lopez, thanks a lot.
Yeah, I guess he did his best Bob Knight impression, trying to throw a chair. I think I saw something about him throwing a chair after getting ejected. I'm gonna have to go back and look and see, because that sounds pretty interesting.
Why couldn't he just say, like, there was a mascot involved and it's just fun banter? Like, that's the excuse.
What did he do to get ejected?
I have no idea. He had two technicals, that's all I know. So it had to be
Okay.
something involved with the refs.
Probably. I'll have to go back and look and see. I don't watch terrible basketball games, and so like the Bulls are terrible, and so I just don't watch any of their games. And when you add the Kings in there, like, there's just no chance in hell I'm going to take time out of my day to like actually go watch it. But I do want to see what Robin Lopez did.
Yeah, probably pretty good. Tonight, fun slate. Cleveland, Orlando first here, 225 total. We talked about this game a little bit before recording. We'll talk about the Cleveland side here first. They just haven't really been that great of fantasy options of late. We've seen LeBron kind of play down a little bit. He's only averaging 47 fantasy points over his last 5 games, and then no one else has really done much here of late.
It's crazy when you're like, he's only averaging 47 fantasy points over his last 5 games. That being said, that's still really, really not good for LeBron James. It's crazy. So on Saturday against the Rockets, he was held to 11 points. This 8th straight game with less than 30 points. In his last 3 games, he's shooting 39% from the floor and shooting 20% from 3-point range. Like, he's really struggling. Have to wonder if he's just tired. Like, he's carried the load like physically for this team, and now he's like shouldering like the emotional burden of this team just being absolutely terrible. I honestly would not be shocked to see like LeBron rest sometime between now and the All-Star break, so I'm just throwing that out there. That being said, if you want to roll him out, feel free. Eventually he's going to have one of his LeBron games where he puts up like 64 fantasy points and you regret fading him. It's a possibility that it happens tonight against an Orlando team that is not very good on defense, but I think I'm definitely looking other places tonight.
Yeah, it's not like his price has come down either. Like, his price is still up over 11K. And then you look at the rest of these guys, like, there's pretty heavy benches involved. Like, we're seeing both teams just run a lot of different weird lineups out there, and it's making it really tough to trust in fantasy.
Yeah, it really is. Like, if you want to roll out Isaiah Thomas and tournaments, feel free. Like, I guess you can use them in cash games if you really wanted to, but he's like 6,200 on DraftKings and 65 on FanDuel. The dude has not shot. He's not shot very well. He's 31% from the floor over his last 5 games. That's really terrible. Can't hit a shot to save his life. That being said, he is getting to the line a decent amount of times, 13 times against Detroit, 9 times against Miami. He's getting some rebounds and assists in there too. So if you do want to take a shot, go for it. Orlando, 30th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games against point guards. I did have a little bit of interest in Dwayne Wade, but he was listed as questionable earlier today with an illness. He missed shoot around. If he sits, you can feel free to roll out J.R. Smith as a value option. And the rest of the guys like Channing Frye, Tristan Thompson, if you want to get exposure, go for it. Like, none of these guys are very good. You're counting on like Channing Frye to hit a bunch of shots to actually get to value. I would rather target the cheap options on the Orlando side of this game than take a shot on anyone from Cleveland.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Smith would be the only guy that I'd maybe look at, like you said, if Wade's out. He's averaging 21 fantasy points over his last 5, which is weirdly the second highest on the team behind LeBron. So that's not good. Yeah, definitely Orlando side, but that's kind of the same thing here. Like, we're looking at some of these guys that we're seeing a lot of DJ Augustine, Shelvin Mack. Some of these guys get into the rotation. You mentioned Mario Zonda is probably the safest play from this Orlando side right now.
Yeah, Super Mario is going to be super chalk tonight, coming off a huge game against Miami, 32 minutes, 20 real points, 38 fantasy points. He's just been really good of late, like over 25 fantasy points in 4 straight games. He's only 4,500 on DraftKings. He's 5K on FanDuel. It's an excellent matchup here for him against a Cleveland team that really struggles on the interior. I don't really necessarily think you have to fade him in tournaments. Like, I think he was pretty highly owned last night. I'd have to go back and look and see, but like I do know that at one point the winning lineup in the tournaments I was in had him in there. So I don't think you have to fade him, and definitely in cash games he's fine. You and I were kind of talking about like the Fourniers and guys like that. Like, they're all playing limited minutes. Alfred is playing limited minutes. Fournier is playing limited minutes. If you want to take a shot in tournaments, go for it. But like, if I'm getting exposure to the Orlando side of this game and a really good matchup, it's going to be the cheap guys like DJ Augustine, who's playing like 24, 25 minutes a night. He's racking up a ton of points in those limited minutes. He made it in the GPP article, but it's now double-digit real points in 4 straight games, double-digit field goal attempts in 3 of the last 4, over 20 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4. He's 3,500 on DraftKings, and he's 4,100 on FanDuel. Like, if he comes out, plays 25 minutes against a Cleveland team that can't defend point guards, he's probably getting you 24, 26 fantasy points. So I would rather go there. If you want to get some Shelvin Mack, go for it. I hate chasing these guys, but the minutes have been there for him, so I don't have an issue doing it. Like I said, I'm taking the cheap options here as opposed to the expensive ones, just because with their minutes being limited, I would rather just get the cheap exposure to this game.
Yeah, I think I'm going to walk back. I told you before the game I was kind of going to be looking to maybe take some shots on Fournier and Payton, but I think you persuaded me to go the other way and go the cheaper side here. Is this the most unappealing fantasy game that's over 220 total, like in the history of DFS?
It might be. Like, I don't know, the Lakers and Suns one might be the same, just because like these teams are rolling out just so many freaking players and no one's playing a bunch of minutes. So like, it's so tough to trust any of these guys. Like, luckily some of their prices have started to fall. Like, Jonathan Simmons is still really cheap. I don't mind using him in cash games, but like, he doesn't have a bunch of upside, so not really going there. And then like the big men for Orlando, like they're all rotating minutes. Like Biyombo's not playing very many. Kim Birch not playing very many minutes. Wesley Iwundu's playing some time at the center spot. Like, there's just too many players that are getting run here. So go for the cheap options and just hope they get you there.
Yeah, let's move on here. Memphis and Atlanta. We're not moving on to anything much better, but let's start with this Memphis side. A little bit healthier, a little bit cleaner of an injury report, I guess, but it's not by much. Like, when you look at it, it's still 7 guys.
Yeah, like we know Tyreek Evans is not going to play. What is it? Wayne Selden is questionable. Deontay Davis is out. And at some point, I have a feeling someone's going to get added to the injury report, and it's going to kind of ruin things. But this game, not really that interesting at all outside of like 2 or 3 guys.
Yeah, like this is a spot where, we obviously like taking centers against Atlanta, and we're talking a little bit about Marcus Gasol. You mentioned to me, his shooting performance has been tough, and you were talking about basically because Tyreek Evans off the floor. You're not worried about the Dylan Brooks and JaMychal Greens and the various guards that they roll out too much.
Yeah, they don't really have any playmakers with Tyreek Evans off the floor. I'm sorry, Andrew Harrison and Wayne Selden, you guys are not elite playmakers. And Marc Gasol actually came out and talked about how like he's really struggled the past couple games because defenses are starting to key in on him, and it really does show. Like he's over the last 2 games, 6 of 16 from the floor, 6 of 21 from the floor. It's an excellent matchup for him against an Atlanta team that's really struggled against centers all season long. He has almost 34% usage rate and is averaging like 1.2 fantasy points per minute with like Conley and Tyreek and Parsons and Davis off the floor. If you want to roll him out there in cash games, feel free. I don't think he has a ton of upside, but he should be able to get you like 40 to 45 fantasy points, which is definitely fine in cash games at his price. Jermichael Green is definitely a little bit interesting. Like he's been playing a couple more minutes. Like he was out for a little while, so like they're going to be ramping up his minutes. But his price is 4,900 at Atlanta, 29th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games against power forwards. I don't mind taking a shot on Jermichael Green in the spot, and then Andrew Harrison made it into the GPP article just too cheap in this matchup. Like he's 5K on DraftKings. I think he's up to 5,400 on FanDuel. Like even with Mario Chalmers being back, like Harrison's still going to play 32 minutes in a matchup against Atlanta, who is really bad against point guards. They struggle against the pick and roll ball handler. Harrison, 44% of his possessions are coming out of the pick and roll. If you're getting 32 minutes of a 5K guy against Atlanta, I don't necessarily think you can overlook that here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's definitely value to be had with this Memphis team, and there likely is going to be that way for some time. And yeah, I don't mind Harrison. He's a guy I've used in the past. You mentioned Jermichael Green, like solid spot. We've seen him produce. He's averaging 27 fantasy points over his last 5 healthy games. Dylan Brooks, no for me. There's some other cheaper small forward options I think I'm going to go with, and he's just kind of more of a scorer, doesn't do too much else.
Yeah, like the games, like the times that he's had really big games, like he's scored double figures, he's notched like 3 or 4 steals, and like he's played a bunch of minutes. And with what James Ennis is healthy, all these other guys are back to being healthy now, except for like Wayne Selden and Deonta Davis. So I'm gonna pass there.
Yeah. On the Atlanta side, Kent Bazemore is probably the only guy that I've really been looking at for Atlanta over the last few games. He's averaging 33 fantasy points over his last 5. Look at Memphis, obviously defensively, they just haven't been themselves this season, kind of as expected. They're middle of the road in defensive efficiency. He's probably it.
Yeah, he's pretty much the safest option on this team, and he has the highest upside out of any of the Atlanta guys, I think. So he would be the one that I'm definitely looking at. I think people might look at like how Memphis has performed against point guards recently and be interested in Dennis Schroeder. I would caution against that just because Memphis is still an excellent rim protection team. I know Schroeder had a good game against him last time out, but I don't necessarily want to chase that. So it's pretty much Bazemore. And if you wanted to maybe sprinkle in some Dwayne Dedmon, who's been playing pretty well recently, I don't necessarily mind that either.
Yep. We'll move on.
Yes, please.
Houston and Brooklyn, 216 total. Houston 10.5 favorites here. Looking at this Houston team, obviously getting a little bit healthier. Eric Gordon due back here. Trevor Ariza is still out. I don't know how much I'm paying up for the studs in this one. Like, I don't mind if you want to get exposure, but I can kind of see their ceilings tapping out a little bit here.
Yeah, this one, I think Vegas is projecting this to be a blowout here. It looks like Houston favored by 11 at this point in time. If you want to get exposure to Harden and Chris Paul, go for it. Like, I don't think I have to tell you both guys are excellent plays in a matchup against a Brooklyn team that is not good on defense. So if you want to play either one, feel free. Chris Paul coming off a big game against the Cavaliers, struggled in his first couple games back from injury, but prior to the injury, like he had been really solid as well. So he would be the guy like I would probably get the most exposure to if I was paying up for one of the 2 guard options here. That being said, I think I'm going to go on the cheaper end of this game and look at Ryan Anderson and Clint Capella. Ryan Anderson made it into my tournament article today, coming off a big game against the Cavaliers. He had 31 fantasy points, 37 fantasy points, 21 real points. I wrote about how Brooklyn has really struggled against power forwards of late. They're 30th in defensive efficiency against the position, and they're letting them shoot pretty darn well recently. Let's see. 47.5% from the floor and 42.2% from three over the last 10 games. They've been really bad against spot up shooters, so the fourth worst team in the NBA defending spot ups. Rhino, a decent spot up shooter this season. And as I was telling you prior to recording, with Rondé Hollis Jefferson off the floor these last few games, they're getting out rebounded 239 to 203. So I think this is a spot where Anderson, especially on the road, comes out, puts up a big game, and could probably get you like a 15 and 10 double-double.
Did you have your puke bucket like off to the side, like when you said that Anderson made it into your GPP article?
No, I got all my puking out of the way yesterday with my hangover.
And also he's on the road, so we don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. So I do actually really like Ryan Anderson here, and like he's 4,200 on FanDuel. That's really, really cheap. 4,700 on DraftKings too. Like for a guy that I think gets you, 32, 34, maybe 36 fantasy points. Like I'll take that at that price.
Yeah. As much as we rag on Ryan Anderson, there have been times where you use him, especially on FanDuel, where he is really cheap. And like you're building that stars and scrubs type lineup, and like Anderson fits perfectly in, and kind of out of the guys around him, he's probably the only one that has 30 plus fantasy point upside.
Yeah, I think so. Like there's maybe a couple more, especially on FanDuel, but like he makes it work, especially you mentioned like the stars and scrubs approach. FanDuel, like using James Harden at shooting guard is probably one of the best decisions you can make tonight, just because shooting guard on FanDuel is terrible.
Yeah, very bad. Yeah, and then you mentioned Clint Capella, like it's just as good a spot. We've been targeting centers against the Nets all season long. I wish I could pull a tournament flyer on Eric Gordon because he is cheap. Like he's only 5,400 on FanDuel, but we talked about this, I think, the last time, and I know Mike Gallagher tweeted out something about basically Gordon just being hindered by injuries during these months over his career, and I think that's going to be a lingering thing moving forward.
Yeah, like if he was in like the low to mid 5Ks, especially like on DraftKings or somewhere like that, I would probably take a shot. He's 54 on FanDuel. I still don't know that I would feel too comfortable doing it, but if you wanted to on FanDuel, you could probably take a tournament flyer. But like he's not gonna have a ton of usage and a ton of production with Chris Paul and James Harden both being healthy.
Yeah. No real other secondary options to look at for Houston.
No, I will say, like you mentioned Clint Capella, Brooklyn just let John Henson pull down 18 rebounds against them. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say. Like Clint Capella in tournaments, probably a good play.
Yeah, get some exposure there. Brooklyn side of things, I don't have a ton of interest. Like some of these guys are priced up a little bit. Jared Allen was fun to use for a couple games, and now like he's up at a price tag where I'm not too thrilled with.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of interest in the Brooklyn side of this game, especially if you look at Houston's defense recently. They're like on the season, they're middle of the pack, only allowing like 105 points or 105.7 points per game. Over the last 13, they posted a defensive rating of 102.5, allowing only 101.8 points per game. They're a solid defense recently. I think DeMarre Carroll's probably the only option that I really have interest in, and he's just like a cash game option. Like he's not a really high upside play, but he's a guy that's playing a decent amount of minutes. It's a fast-paced game, so maybe he could fall into a couple extra steals or something like that, and he's not going to be hindered by the return of D'Angelo Russell. So I think Carroll's the guy that I have the most interest in, and the rest of them, like Karis LeVert, not playing enough minutes, not getting enough usage. Allen Crabbe, Joe Harris, you're gonna get the hot hand approach there. So And like, I don't want anything to do with Spencer Dinwiddie and D'Angelo Russell here. So it's Carroll, and that's it.
Yeah, there's only two players on this Nets team over the last 5 games averaging 30 or more minutes, and that's Dinwiddie and Carroll. And
Yeah.
Dinwiddie, we're not looking at it at all. For some reason, FanDuel hasn't priced at 7,200 outside. Well, we saw the Harkless thing over the weekend, so nothing should really surprise us anymore.
He's basically been like that same price on FanDuel for a while. Like, he is a better DraftKings play. He's 6,500. Like, the last 2 games, nine assists, 10 assists, some steals in there. Like, he's not a terrible cash game option if you think this game stays close, but like, there's just better ways to go tonight.
Yeah, and they've bounced back here quite a bit. Last 10 games against point guards defensive efficiency, they're second in the league.
Yeah.
So, let's move on. Milwaukee and New York. This is a slate that's just like, it's going to be tough to get through. Milwaukee side here, Giannis probable for tonight's game. Brogdon, was injured a few games ago. He's going to be out for some time. Not a big fan of this game. Like, I like the names here, but I'm not super thrilled with this one.
I cannot believe you're going to disrespect Matthew Dellavedova and just not talk about the fact that he's going to be sidelined for 3 to 4 weeks now. Like, that's a huge blow to the Milwaukee Bucks.
You would think I would be one of the worst DFS players just with the names that you feel like I'm skipping. Like, I'm rostering Zeller and Dellavedova like on a nightly basis.
If people can't hear the sarcasm in my voice, then I'm sorry, I can't help you. This game, and like, you would think on paper it would be really, really interesting. I do have more interest in the Milwaukee side of this game if I was going to get exposure here. Obviously, you talked about Giannis. He is expected to play after that ankle injury. I'm concerned though. Like, I don't really. He's down. He's 11K on DraftKings. He is 11.5 on FanDuel. I think there's better ways to go, but if you want to get tournament exposure, this is a matchup where, like, the last time these teams played, he put up 29 and 11. His usage rate with Joe Prunty at the helm is ridiculous. It is, I can't find it in my notes. 34.7% since Joe Prunty took over. Bledsoe 27.7%, Middleton 26%. Obviously, the loss of Malcolm Brogdon has kind of changed things a little bit for this team. So if you want to go with Giannis, feel free. Bledsoe, the last time these teams played, fouled out trying to defend Jarrett Jack. If you want to take a shot on Bledsoe, he's 7K. Like, I'm kind of out at that price range. And now with Tyler Zeller expected to get minutes, you definitely can't look at John Henson, especially not after he just put up 50 fantasy points and everyone raised his price to like almost 6K.
John Henson was free for about 3 games. And then all of a sudden here we are, like, another big that's going to come in and like just make him enough to be unplayable. And it's like, I'm a little bummed, and Henson's price is up there. You mentioned Bledsoe. I don't mind him, especially on DraftKings. Like, he is fairly cheap. He can take a shot there. He's only 7K. That's it. Like, we kind of looked at Middleton and Bledsoe. Like, their performances for their prices, I guess, have dropped off a little bit. Like, they're still averaging 33 and 30 fantasy points per game, but you're kind of looking at the slate and there's some other guys who have just been better of late.
Yeah, for a guy like Middleton, it's one of those things where, like, you're just kind of locking in a decent amount of minutes. Like, I know he only played 31 against Brooklyn, but like, you do feel kind of okay, especially on FanDuel, using him in cash games just because shooting guard is so terrible. So I don't necessarily mind that, but the rest of it, like I said, I don't know. Like, I don't necessarily like that price on Bledsoe. I liked him more when he was, in the low 6Ks.
Yeah. Nick's side of things. Oh, you want to talk about Jabari Parker here?
If you wanted to take a shot on it, feel free. He's still really cheap on FanDuel. Like, he put up 21 fantasy points last time out. His first game back was 15. He's getting to the line. Like, he's gotten to the line 6 times in back-to-back games. If you wanted to take a shot on him, feel free. Like, he's probably not going to play any more than 20 minutes. And I do have concern. Like, we've seen with like Levine and Isaiah Thomas, these guys coming back from injury, first couple games, they're really, really good. And then they like hit a wall and struggle for a few games. So there is a little bit of risk, but like at 4,600 and 4,100, I don't necessarily hate it if you're dying to get exposure here.
Yeah, I don't either. On the Knicks side of things, basically one guy for me, and that's Cantor. Been over 30 fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games. Minutes have been pretty solid. He's been above 26 in each of those games as well. He crushed here last time, 17 to 18. I will say, though, the turnovers here for FanDuel have been a little concerning of late. 3, 6, 5, and 4. Given the fact that he doesn't usually produce a lot of defensive stats either, that's kind of worrisome, where he may get 35 fantasy points and all of a sudden he's sucked down to like 28 because he has like 5 turnovers.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a risky spot for him, especially at an elevated price tag. I do like him more on FanDuel where he's cheaper. He's 6,900 there. I will say, like, the Bucks over the last 10 games are a top 3 defense in the NBA. It was a major focus of Joe Prunty's whenever he's been like a coach in the past. And they have been a solid rebounding team. They're only giving up 42.5 rebounds over the last 10 games, only 99.6 points per game. So like you are taking a little bit of a risk with the Knicks side of this game. But if you wanted to get exposure to Cantor, I think he's fine. Porzingis, he's tired. All that supermodel chasing and whatnot. But coming off a solid game against Atlanta, he is back at home where he has shot significantly better this season. You could go there as well. And then like Courtney Lee is still a great cash game option just because he's still playing a bunch of minutes. And then the rest of it, like I don't want the carousel of point guards, and I'm off Tim Hardaway Jr. until he can hit a shot.
I've been chasing the Porzingis big game for maybe the last 2 weeks, and I don't usually play NBA on Sundays, and of course that's the day he goes off.
Well, he had a good game against Brooklyn.
Yeah, it was fine. But it wasn't, the 50 burger that I was looking for, but it was close.
Yeah, like he's just like this whole Knicks team is pretty unappealing, especially the way they've been playing recently. Outside of Cantor, who just continues to be a double machine.
Yeah, and I do think Porzingis is tired. Like I'm ready to fire him up after the break for sure.
Yeah, assuming he doesn't get hurt or something. But like,
don't even talk about that, man.
Yeah, like this Knicks team is so bad. They scored under 97 points each of his last 3 games. Like they're just really bad.
That's gross. We don't have much better to move on to. It's another 205 total with Boston and Toronto. Kyrie Irving, Marcus Morris likely to play tonight. I'm still going to keep an eye on that situation. Irving was probable, I think, a few times before and then ended up sitting out, so I'm still going to be hesitant.
Yeah, it's one of those ones where you definitely want to watch the news. We should know prior to lock if they're going to play. I think Irving you can roll out in cash games if you wanted to. I'm not going to say he doesn't have upside, but I don't think he has a very high ceiling in this spot. Cue the Kyrie Irving 60 fantasy point game. I had more interest in this game when I thought Kyrie and Marcus Morris were going to sit, because then you could look at Al Horford, who's just been a monster with those guys off the floor. But like I said, if you wanted to roll Kyrie out there in cash games, you could. And that's pretty much it from the Boston side of this game. It's just not very appealing at all.
It's not. I mean, these two defenses are very solid. I will say Horford's a little bit attractive over on FanDuel at 7,700. The AK on DraftKings I'm not too thrilled with, and Toronto hasn't been great against centers of late. 28th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games. I don't know if it's because Valanciunas is trying to focus his game on being a defensive or an offensive superstar, and we're just not getting some of these rotations where everyone's helping out. Like Toronto has been beaten up by centers of late.
Yeah, they have, and that does make Horford a little bit interesting. But like if his price was just a little bit lower, I would definitely have more interest. But like it's still just I think it's still just a little bit too high. But if you wanted to take a tournament flyer on him, you could get away with doing that.
Yeah, his ceiling does drop a little bit lower with Irving back.
Yeah, it really does. And like you're not getting the 1.4 fantasy points per minute with Irving off the floor.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't really have any interest in like Jason Tatum. I know he's had a couple of big games, but usage has been up with Irving off the floor. Last time these two teams played, he had 19 fantasy points in 33 minutes. That was the same situation. Irving didn't play that game as well. So, yeah, this Boston side's not that appealing here.
Yeah, and you definitely can't use Scary Terry at 7,300 now that Kyrie is supposed to be back.
No, it's a bummer. Toronto side of things here, I'm not super thrilled. Lowry's cheap. Like, he's 7K on FanDuel. What's he around DraftKings?
7,200. I know he has not been great. Like, he has not been shooting the ball very well at all, but that's just too cheap for Kyle Lowry. And we know Boston's point guard defense really not that good with Marcus Smart out. Like, they're 13th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games. I would definitely get some Lowry exposure here.
Yeah, Lowry's kind of the only guy for me. I don't know. Everyone else has kind of been pretty mad. Like, Serge Ibaka's pretty cheap. Like, he's 4,800 on FanDuel. I think over on DraftKings, he's 5K. He'd probably be the other one I'd take a shot on.
How dare you not bring up Fred VanVleet?
I'm not doing that. Oh, God.
I don't mind, like, if you want it, like, he's playing really well. Like, some of this has been blowout run. Some of it maybe, the new baby narrative. Like, he's playing extremely well. He has double-digit field goal attempts in 3 of his last 4 games. He's getting the assists, the rebounds, the steals. He's still really cheap. He's 4,400 on DraftKings. He's 4,800 on FanDuel. If you wanted to sprinkle in some Fred VanVleet exposure, feel free. Like, this bench unit has been playing really, really, really well. Like, they're all guys that are really cheap and somewhat viable. Like, Jakob Poeltl is cheap, somewhat viable in this spot. Like I said, Fred VanVleet's at least a little. You can at least consider him here. And the same with DeLon Wright. Like, he's someone that you can consider as well. Like, I'm not saying get a ton of exposure to any of these guys, but like, if they fit your roster construction and you want to get some tournament exposure, I think you can.
Yeah, I don't mind it. Valanciunas here. No, not tonight.
I mean, look, he's been really good recently. He's still only playing limited minutes. He has a 60-point ceiling. He's 5,500 on DraftKings.
He's 69.
Yeah, so DraftKings only. Feel free to roll him out if you want to. Probably not in cash games just because the minutes, of course, like we talk about. But he does have plenty of upside at 5,500. But yeah, you're not paying 6,900 for him.
No. DeMar DeRozan, I'm not really looking at tonight. A guy who's probably going to find himself around 35 fantasy points. And we've seen, obviously, the minutes kind of go down a little bit because of the blowouts of late. You expect this one to stay somewhat close. But DeRozan's peripherals haven't really been that attractive, like in comparison to when he was really having his high ceiling games.
Yeah, like I think if you're looking on FanDuel where shooting guard is pretty terrible, you can lock in a guy. Like, I know he's up to 8,400 and getting 35, 36 fantasy points isn't great at that price, but you're not really feeling that comfortable in a whole lot of other guys at the shooting guard position. So I think he's probably in play there, but DraftKings at 7,700, there's a lot of better options to go with.
Yep. Washington, Philly. This game's obviously got some guys to talk about for once here. It seems as we move into our 6th game of the night. Washington on the back-to-back. What are you doing with Bradley Beal here?
I think you go back to the well. Like, I mean, we're still talking about a dude with a massive usage rate. It's still over 34%. Let's see, 32.9%, still averaging 1.1 fantasy points per minute without John Wall on the floor. I mean, Philly's been a solid defense of late. They still, I mean, they're 3rd in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games against shooting guards, but I think you can still take a shot. Like Washington's been really good with John Wall off the floor. Like they're uh, averaging 115.8 points per game since he's gone down. They're a ton of assists, or 27 assists in each of their last 3 games or something like that. He's still a fine option. Like I think he's in play. Um, they let us down last night. Last night was just a game where everybody contributed. Kelly Oubre was outstanding in that game. Like I think you can go back to the well with him. And Satoransky on a per minute basis was solid last night. 20.5 fantasy points and 22 minutes. Still 5,200 on DraftKings and 56 on FanDuel. I think he's still viable too. So I think there's a lot to like with this Washington team.
Yeah, like you mentioned Oubre. Otto Porter was a letdown last night. I don't mind going back to Porter here, even at a heightened price tag. Philly 20th in defensive efficiency against small forwards the last 10 games. We've seen Porter pick things up a little bit of late. We started to see that ceiling again. I might go some other directions in cash games, a little bit cheaper, but I think Porter's an interesting GPP option.
Yeah, and he's the guy. I mean, I think I mentioned it yesterday. Actually, sees the largest increase in usage with John Wall off the floor. Is increase of 4.2%, 3.09 fantasy points per 36 minutes. I think he's definitely a fine option. And if you throw out last night's game, like he had been really a pretty good fantasy option over the last few games. I mean, 35, 42, 43 fantasy points, double-digit rebounds in one of those games. The assist numbers are solid for him. Getting a couple steals in there and of course the scoring. So I'd feel free to go back to Porter. And like I said, Oubre I think is a fine option too.
Yep. You go with any of the bigs here like Morris or Gortat. Saw Mimi play well last night. Mike Scott got involved as well.
I don't mind sprinkling in some Gortat like at his price. It's 4,900 on DraftKings. He's probably like 10K, 52. Okay, 52 on FanDuel. Like the minutes are still going to be a thing for him, but he's producing decent numbers when he's playing. And it's a matchup. What do you average? 20, almost 30 fantasy points in 2 games against the Sixers this season. So tournament option there. I don't know if I want to go with Morris here. It like when he was in the mid 5Ks, he was definitely a good option. He's up like around the 6K range, definitely fine in cash, but like he doesn't have a ceiling for tournaments at that price.
Yeah, and we looked at Philly. I mean, they've been pretty solid against power forwards of late. Like their interior defense has been a lot improved. And you mentioned the guard play, and I'm kind of thinking if Redick back a little bit here if that changes.
Yeah, it might. Like now that Redick is back, like their guard defense might not be that good.
Yeah. Moving on to Philly side here, quite a few options. Really, I mean, probably 4 or 5 guys here that are all very playable in all formats.
Yeah, like my initial lineups have like a Sixers stack, and it starts with Joel Embiid. Like he's just the first guy in my lineups today, especially on DraftKings where he's 9,500. I talked about him in the tournament article today, but obviously the minutes restriction is off. He's playing back-to-backs now. Hasn't been outstanding. I mean, 45, 41, 47 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4, 52 against Brooklyn. A couple of tough matchups, obviously the Indiana game. I didn't actually expect him to be that good just because it was his first ever back-to-back, but against a Washington team where he's averaged almost 50 fantasy points in less than 30 minutes. Washington 18th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games against centers. I'm definitely going to have some Joel Embiid exposure here.
Yeah, definitely. And Robert Covington's the guy that I have some interest in GPPs here tonight. He's a guy who's done well against Washington in the past. We generally like to take players, of the small forward position against Washington. Finally coming off a big game against Indiana, like he's been really bad, like really, really bad of late. Usage hasn't really been that high, but the minutes continue to be there. He's a guy who's got to get hot to kind of get going. He does have that steal potential as well. I don't mind taking some GPP shots with Covington.
Yeah, I think he's a fine tournament option, and it's like you mentioned the minutes. Minutes have been solid for him. I mean, he's double-digit field goal attempts, and what 4 of his last 5 games. He had a really bad game against Brooklyn, but like if he's hitting on his shots, like he's just going to keep shooting, and it's a good spot for him. So I really do like him. And then Ben Simmons is a guy that I have a ton of interest in, and he's another guy that's pretty much a lock for my lineups, especially on DraftKings. At his price of 8,200, he's 85 on FanDuel. It's still a solid price. The Washington Wizards really, really struggle to defend the rim. Opponents shooting almost 65% at the rim. Like 54% of his field goal attempts are coming at the rim this season. It's like one of the highest marks for a combo guard in the NBA. I think it's a good spot for him, and it's a matchup where he's been really good. 2 matchups so far this season, 55.5 fantasy points. He hasn't been great over his last few games, but he also hasn't been terrible. So like he has several games over his last 10 where he's over the 40 fantasy point mark. I think we can go back to the well with him and cash hand tournaments.
Yep, I'm with you. I'm never going to hate Dario Saric. His price is a little bit higher than I'd like on tonight's slate. I think with the other options, it's not a bad spot. If you're going balanced, I don't mind him. But that's about it for him.
Yeah, like I'm still waiting for that price to come down. But if you wanted to go there, you could. Just like his upside is severely capped whenever Embiid plays.
He's probably more of a FanDuel play because there's just such a steep drop off at power forward after Green. Like Green's 8K, and then you drop down to Sarge, who's 6,700, and he's around guys like Morris and Tatum and Melo, like all kind of in a similar boat.
Yeah, he's probably one of the safer options in that like 6K range, except for Carmelo at 6K. That's really cheap, but we'll get to that here in a minute.
Yeah, so outside of that, that's pretty much it for the Philly side.
Yeah, definitely Simmons, Embiid, and Covington for sure, guys that I do have a lot of interest in.
OKC, Golden State, a game that's a lot of people are going to be talking about on tonight's slates. We were talking previously about kind of the previous meetings between these two sides, and they haven't exactly been fantasy friendly.
No, just off subject really quick. How do you feel about cupcakes? Are you a cupcake fan?
No, I'm not a big cake guy in general. I love cheesecake, and that's kind of where I stop with cakes.
I like cupcakes. Cupcakes are amazing. And like, I mean, Kevin Durant is an amazing play if we're talking about cupcakes. Like he's the guy that I have the most interest in from this Golden State side of this game.
But what kind of cupcakes? Because I love funfetti cupcakes.
Funfetti cupcakes are pretty good. Like I like cupcakes with a lot of frosting though, because I like to eat the frosting.
Yeah, that's the best part. But then after you get past the frosting, it's like, yeah.
And you just throw it away.
Yeah, it's like a muffin. All right, OKC side of things here. There are some attractive plays. Like I don't mind getting some exposure to some of these guys. I think Paul George at 8K on FanDuel is a really intriguing spin off of Durant, or if you're not quite going into that next tier. Like the matchups really aren't that great for a lot of these guys.
No, but I will say this, like over the last 10 games, Golden State giving up a league high 113.9 points per game. Their defensive rating is 109.2. Like Steve Kerr came out and basically said they're tired and they're playing like crap. They are back at home, so that probably will play into this game a little bit. You mentioned Paul George. He's the guy I think from the OKC side I have the most interest in. If you're wanting to get a guy like, I mean, his steals, I expected them to go down a little bit with Andre Roberson off the floor, and they did. He's averaging about 2 per game after, like, he's got 2 per game over his last 3 games after, like, a stretch of, like, 3 or 4 games where he had 3 and 4. But minutes are solid for him, double-digit field goal attempts, and at least 4 of his last 5 games. I think he's the guy, like he's probably one of the safer options from the OKC side of his game because he doesn't necessarily have the turnover potential that Russell Westbrook does.
Yeah, and it's just, you look at a solid game against OKC last time. Like you mentioned defensive efficiency. Like they're only 16th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 against small forwards. they haven't looked great. Like I'm trying to chalk up like maybe they're playing down to their opponents because it's not like they've been playing great talented teams lately either.
Yeah, like let's see, they played Denver. They don't even really have a small forward unless you want to consider Will Barton to be a small forward. Sacramento, Utah, Boston. Yeah. I don't know. There's not a dominant small forward on any of those teams. I'm sorry, Jason Tatum. And then you get like Minnesota, New York, Houston, Chicago, Cleveland, Toronto. There's two dominant small forwards in that whole spot and that whole 10-game stretch. So for them to be that bad against small forwards in that stretch of time is pretty embarrassing. So yeah, definitely like some Paul George here.
Yeah. When you look at some of the other options, like not going to say no to Westbrook. Like you can use him. He had a solid game last time out. I think he might be a little bit better of a DK play just because I think the turnovers are going to rack up tonight. We've seen that in the past games against Golden State.
Yeah, 10 or more turnovers twice in the last 4 games against Golden State. So you're gonna get like there's a 50% chance, right, based off the last 4 games that he's gonna turn the ball over at least 10 times. That's 10 points you're getting deducted from your total on FanDuel.
I mean, he's had 20 over his last 3 games. Like you look like last game against the Lakers, 36 points, 9 assists, 5 rebounds. You're thinking like, oh man, a decent score. Only had 51 fantasy points.
Yeah. Yeah. If you want to roll him out, feel free. I mean, like what 34, 10, and 9 the last time these teams played, like he has upside. He's had some big games against them, but like if I'm taking a shot on anyone from Oklahoma City in a game where they could definitely just get obliterated, I'm gonna go with the cheaper options, and that starts with Paul George for sure.
Yeah. Then we kind of look at like Steven Adams, Carmelo Anthony. Adams' price is a little bit higher, but I mean, averaging 34 fantasy points over his last 5 games. Last time out, he had 31 fantasy points. We've seen Golden State give up some big games to centers of late. Like, I think he's in line for a nice double-double here. Ceiling game, I don't know if I quite see it.
I don't see it not at that price, but if you wanted to roll him out there, I think you could. I mentioned Carmelo Anthony down to $6K on FanDuel. That is definitely an interesting price, and the Warriors definitely have struggled against power forwards recently. 21st in defensive efficiency. It's been an issue for the majority of the season. They're 28th in fantasy points allowed. Like you and I were talking about it prior to recording, like Draymond Green has been like defensively not as good as he has been in the past. Like he's had his moments, but like his defensive reputation is mostly just by name at this point. Hasn't been as good on the defensive end. So I think you can look at Carmelo. The one guy that I will throw out there as an interesting punt option from the Oklahoma City side of this game is going to be Jeremy Grant. Finally starting to get run 25, 23, 17 minutes over his last 4 games, had a 22 in there against Philly as well. He's a guy last season that got thrown out there a couple of times to defend Steph Curry, and he did a really, really, really good job. So without Roberson in the lineup, he's probably going to get some extra run as a defensive assignment option. So like just his length and his ability to crash the glass and his athleticism makes him a very interesting option here, and double-digit rebounds in 2 straight games. So he's still really cheap, 4,500 on DraftKings, 44 on FanDuel. I think he's a viable punt option.
Yeah, definitely don't mind him. That's about it, though.
Yeah.
Golden State side of things, not really thrilled with all these prices. Let's talk Durant here first. He's been another one who's been kind of quiet of late.
Yeah, I mean, he had a huge game against the Kings. I guess I would not huge, but 48 fantasy points, 33 points. He had 31 against Denver, 52.5 fantasy points. He's the guy that I do have the most exposure in, and it's just narrative driven at this point. Like, didn't have a great game against the Thunder back in OKC, but he was really solid against OKC in their meetings last time out, or last season. We were looking at it earlier, and he had a couple like really, really big games against them. a couple down games as well, but he's the guy that I think I have the most exposure to, and it's mostly just a narrative street play there.
Yeah, I think everyone else is kind of a little bit expensive for my taste. I don't mind Curry and GPPs. Like you can take a shot. OKC's been pretty average against point guards of late. Um, that's about it for me. Like I don't see myself using a ton of Draymond Green tonight. Like maybe I'll get a little bit of exposure. Klay Thompson, like there's other point guards I think I'm going to use.
And I was trying to find it in my notes. And let's see, 3 straight wins over OKC last season. Durant averaged 37.7 real points. So that's pretty good. But Oklahoma City's defense has been really, really, really bad. Since Roberson went down, opponents have shot 45% from 3. It's not 45% from the floor. That's 45% from 3-point range. So your 3-point shooters, Steph and Klay and KD, all viable options. Klay has had a couple big games against OKC in the past, and so I mentioned with no Roberson, they're going to start getting eaten up on the perimeter. And it's already started to show over the last 10 games, 24th in defensive efficiency. So Klay is a solid option. A decent way to get exposure to the Golden State side of this game, and especially on FanDuel at 6,700, where shooting guard is really, really bad, as I've mentioned like 900 times already today. I think he's definitely in play in all formats.
Yeah, there's 4 shooting guards in the 6K range, like total on FanDuel. It's Klay Thompson, Evan Fournier, Bazemore, and Clarkson. Like it's pretty clear.
Yeah, it's bad.
Yeah. Are you on with the Zaza Pachulia train here?
I will say this. He's been solid lately. He's been absolutely crushing his last 3 games. 24, 26, 27 fantasy points. He's only playing limited minutes. Maybe he gets a little extra run with Adams playing heavy minutes. I wouldn't say no in tournaments.
What are the odds someone gets thrown out of that game?
I'd say they're pretty high.
I think so. I think this is a Draymond ejection game tonight.
I kind of hope so. I love it when Draymond gets ejected.
It's fun. I'm gonna call my shot there. I'm not even gonna say anything at the end of the show. Like I'm just gonna call it Draymond Green ejection.
The last time I tried to predict someone getting ejected, it was DeMarcus Cousins, and it was against the Trailblazers last season. And I said he had like a 25% chance of getting ejected, and I've been made fun of it like every time those teams play since that game. So I'm not gonna assign odds to it or anything, but I would love a Draymond Green ejection.
Well, he's got that beef with Myers Leonard, which doesn't make any sense to me at all because Myers Leonard is just like not even 5% of the player that DeMarcus Cousins is.
Yeah, it's a funny beef.
Yeah. Phoenix and LA here, 218 total. A game that you'd think would be incredible and would be a lot of fun is kind of the similar situation of like Cleveland and Orlando, where you're kind of riding like a lot of lineups and a lot of guys that are coming out. The good thing is Phoenix side is, not good, but obviously we have Devin Booker who is ruled out, so that is one less body for them.
Yeah, this game is like every other game. Like you look at it, like the odds or like the projected points totals, and you're like, man, there's going to be a lot of fantasy goodness in all these games. And then you start to dig in, and it's like, the Phoenix side of things. You mentioned Booker being out; they're also without Cannon after that gruesome injury. I think this is the first time we've had Phoenix on a slate that we recorded, but. Gruesome injury. And obviously Greg Monroe is not there anymore either. Mike James is not there anymore either. So we're going to get plenty of minutes for Tyler Ulis, plenty of minutes for Josh Jackson, plenty of minutes for maybe some Josh Gray. I think all 3 guys are viable. Like I think I've been on the Jackson train basically since that Houston game where he shot 13 times and missed every single one of them. I think he's shooting like 59% from the floor in the game since then. Still only 5,900. It is an excellent matchup. The dude's 14, 18, 14, 16 field goal attempts in his last 4 games. Like he is chucking and he's hitting his shots, and I'm going to continue to ride the Josh Jackson train until the wheels fall off.
Yeah, I'm with you. Over 20 real points in his last 4 games. 30% usage rate or higher in 4 of the last 5.
Yeah, and like his usage rate without Booker on the floor is pretty darn high. It's like 33%. So it's a good spot for him, definitely. And then Ulyss is still too cheap, like especially on FanDuel at 3,700. I think he's probably a lock and load at that price, and even at 4,200 on DraftKings, like excellent option tonight.
Yep. And it's because Josh Jackson's basically 1,000 cheaper than Warren. Like Warren's just kind of out of consideration for me here because I just take basically a similar floor and upside and use Jackson for 1,000 less.
Yeah, and we've talked about it already several times. Like Warren is just not as good with Devin Booker off the floor. Like his usage rate is fine. He's 20, almost 30%. He's only averaging 0.83 fantasy points per minute. I think I went back and looked. There's been Booker's missed 11 total games. I think 4 of the games Warren has scored over 35 fantasy points. That's not a great return at his current price. If you wanted to roll him out in cash, feel free, but I just don't see a bunch of upside even in this matchup for him. So I'm kind of off that. And it grazed over Josh Gray. He is a G League call up. He was really good for the Suns G League team. Came into the game against Utah. It was a total blowout, but played 9 minutes, had 14 fantasy points in 9 minutes. If he's going to get extra run, like maybe 15, 18 minutes and put up that kind of production in limited time at 3K, this could be like a Joe Young situation from last night. So I don't mind taking a tournament shot on Josh Gray at like near minimum salary across the industry.
Yep. Then you got Dragon Bender, like still really cheap. Going to see some run here tonight in a good spot. I'm probably completely punting the power forward position on FanDuel. Like you have Ryan Anderson down there, you have Bender down there. You mentioned Jeremy Grant, who I don't mind at all. Jabari Parker, like power forward is extremely weak tonight in the tops here. Like we didn't like Porzingis. Green's not that great of a spot. I think he's playing a quarter of the game anyway. And then you got Ben Simmons. Like outside of that, it's pretty meh.
Yeah, power forward on FanDuel is Ben Simmons, and then I'm going to have either Ryan Anderson, Dragon Bender, or Parker in there. And it's tough. Like cash games, I think you're still probably rolling Dragon Bender just because I think he's probably a better player at this point in his career. But tournaments, it's definitely Ryan Anderson. On DraftKings, like if you're looking at the power forward center position for Phoenix, like Tyson Chandler's fine in this matchup, but like I think I have the most interest in Dragon Bender because he's the cheapest option. He's at 4K, and it's a good spot for him. Like I think there's a clear path to him coming out and putting up like 30 fantasy points here against the Lakers tonight, and that's a really solid return at 4K.
Yeah, definitely. Anything else you're gonna talk about here?
No. I will say this: he hasn't actually been able to hit a shot recently and hasn't really done much of anything, but Jared Dudley over 20 minutes in 4 straight games.
Interesting.
Just throwing it out there.
So he's doing more than just trying to get at Cantor on Twitter.
Well, he's working off that dad bod.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Good matchup against the Lakers to try and get that done. Lakers side of things here. We've seen a similar situation where kind of guys are averaging like upper 20s in minutes. We've seen, obviously, I think it's probably the same case over the last few times where we said if you want to play some safer options, like it's been Randall and Ingram. But Brook Lopez has come alive of late, and we were talking a little bit about him before the show. I mean, 34, 27 minutes. I didn't know if the Brooklyn game was just kind of a little extra for him, and then I see him play 34 minutes against OKC. I'm like, all right, is he back?
Yeah, like I have to wonder if if it's just because he's been playing really well and he's getting the run because of that. It also could just be like OKC has a traditional center, so they rolled out Brook Lopez. The Brooklyn game, probably a little bit of revenge narrative there. But again, 3 games against Phoenix this season, he's averaged 30 minutes. And he's put up almost 40 fantasy points averaging almost 40 fantasy points per game. You're risking him going back to like 9 minutes, 10 minutes, 11 minutes, something like that, or 15 or 17 is probably more likely. But if he gets run, like this is a great spot for him against a team that really does struggle to defend stretch bigs. So he could get extra run, and I think in tournaments he's definitely a viable option. As far as cash games goes, you're not playing. You can't take that risk. I love Julius Randle here, who has been one of the safest options on the board for the Lakers side. I mean, he's over 30 fantasy points in like 4 straight games. Just been excellent recently. So he's the guy that I have the most interest in cash games. And then Ingram, who has been playing a little bit better of late. And you and I were talking about it before we started recording. Like he's been like the primary ball handler recently with no Lonzo Ball, back-to-back solid outings. 3 of his last 4 games have been over 30 fantasy points, minutes back up where we want to see him, and it's a great matchup. So I do like Ingram a lot here.
Yeah, and when you kind of look at like the cheaper guys, Josh Hart's not 3,500 anymore. Like I know he's played huge minutes over the last 2 games. I know he's played well. I'll let you kind of throw your stat in there just because of, the rebounding thing has been so huge for him, but it's a different story tonight.
Yeah, so like if you look at it on the season, like his usage rate with Lonzo Ball off the floor is almost non-existent. Like it's something like 12%. Like he's listed as a point guard and a shooting guard on DraftKings. I think he's point guard only on FanDuel. He is not like the primary ball handler. So don't be confused. Don't get that twisted, yo. Don't get it twisted. He's playing off the ball and he's shooting guard on FanDuel. But his value comes primarily from rebounds, like double-digit rebounds, 11 and 14 in his last 2 games. The other games this season where he was absolutely crushing, like he was getting a bunch of rebounds and, double-digit points. Phoenix Suns this season against guards, 3rd best team as far as limiting rebounds. They're only giving up 17.7 rebounds per game to guards. That's the 3rd lowest number in the NBA behind the Thunder and behind the Pistons. So if you want to chase the points with him, go for it. I am 100% fading though. And like I faded him all the time whenever he was crushing earlier this season and eventually the wheels fell off. And I'm going to count on that happening again tonight. So he's a fade for me, but if you want to roll him out, feel free in cash games. I think KCP is the guy that I have the most interest in tournaments. And I wrote him up in the tournament article. Minutes suck recently. They really do, but it's a good matchup for him. So I think he's the guy that I have the most interest in tournaments.
Yeah, it's not like, you look at Clarkson, his minutes have been lower than what KCP's have been over the last, 5 games. Hart's the only one really over the last 2. But yeah, outside of that, I think KCP can get a little bit of an extra run here.
Yeah, I kind of hope he does. And this is a matchup, like I alluded to it in the GPP article. Like he's been really good in this matchup before. He's averaging 32 fantasy points in 35 minutes, and he's like some of his value comes from rebounds, but he's also double-digit scoring in 3 of his last 4, getting some steals and things like that. And against a team that will turn the ball over a lot, I think he can pad his numbers there. So I would rather take a shot on KCP than Josh Hart.
Yep, I'm with you. Like Larry Nance and Kyle Kuzma have almost been like erased from the rotation over the last few games.
Yeah, well, Kuzma's been not good recently. Like if you just look at his shooting numbers over his last 5 games, 34% from the floor, I think he hit the proverbial rookie wall.
Yeah, I think so too. And then Larry Nance might just have he might be just practicing up for the dunk contest, I think, of late.
Yeah, I think he's saving his energy for the dunk contest.
Yeah. That's about it for today. So maybe you could tell, but it's an okay slate. It should be some fun, though. Should be some chaos. Draymond Green especially getting thrown out. So I'll let you call your shot for tonight. What's your narrative? What do you got going on?
I'm going to set the over-under on testicle kicks at 2.
So if that's the case, I probably shouldn't play Steven Adams because a ruptured testicle could be in the works for him.
It could be. Well, he could do the testicle kicking. Like he has added that to his repertoire recently. So he could get one in there, and Draymond Green could get one in there, and then maybe just another one happens, and we hit the over.
Oh, man, this is going to be a fun game. I think we have to tune in. I'm solely rooting for ejections tonight and testicle kicks.
I am rooting for something amazing to happen. And again, we're 2 days away from the trade deadline now, so somebody's getting traded today. Somebody is going to get traded today. Yeah, it's going to happen.
for sure. That's it for us. You can enter dailyfantasycafe.com. Check out Brent's GPP article for tonight's slate. Cheat sheets, optimizer, everything as usual. And good luck, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Good luck.